But welcome everybody to Zen's workshop today on strategies and resources for supporting children with autism. It's going to be a really interesting session with lots of interactive activities for you to engage with and share your knowledge and experience of working with young people and children with autism. And hopefully you'll take away some really helpful guidance and strategies that you can use to support children in your classrooms. So today we're going to be your hosts. My name's Olivia. A couple of you've already met me. So I worked as an SENTA and support worker for a children's charity in Birmingham for about 4 years. Through that work, I was working with children aged sort of 4 up to young people aged 25 who had a wide range of different needs, including autism, profound and multiple learning needs, complex needs, etc. I'm now an account manager and an SEN lead at Zen Educate, which means I work with all of our special needs schools, pupil referral units and hospital schools, helping the senior leaders there find the right people for their pupils. And I'm also here to help you guys learn a little bit more about supporting children with special needs. I'm also joined by Charly, so I'll let her introduce herself.
Hey, yeah, I'm Charly. I'm a software developer here at Zen Educate, but in my previous career, I was an SEN teacher. And yeah, I sort of got into that actually through a similar sort of way. Like I was a support worker for a company in Manchester, and then later on for Resources for Autism in London. Then I was an SENTA, and then yeah, did my teacher training and worked in SEN schools for a few years before I changed careers. So yeah, it's really cool to be able to share some of my knowledge with you lot, and yeah, hopefully we'll all do a bit of sharing.
Great, thank you, Charly. So today, as you know, at the end we are going to have a Q&A, as some of you have already submitted some of your questions during the sign up. But if you've got any questions about some of the content we go through, please use I've put the Q&A box there, but I meant the comment box actually. Please use the comment box to ask any questions. We've got one of my colleagues from marketing, Ross, on the call, who's going to be collating all of the questions, and we will go through them all at the end. Hi, Ross. Also, we've got a couple of interactive activities, so please use the chat box to engage in those. I'll be asking you a few questions just to reflect on your understanding of autism and sort of some of the challenges that young people have faced once they've had a diagnosis of autism and how it affects their lives. And if you can answer if you can address your answers to the chat box and all attendees, so that everyone can learn from each other as well. So what we're going to go through today, obviously we're going to go through basically what is autism and sort of the foundations of what that diagnosis means for children and young people. We're going to go through what autism-friendly classrooms will look like, some of the strategies that you can use to support the main deficits seen in children with autism. Charly's got some great top tips for teachers and is going to draw on her experiences working in an SEN school to sort of build on the skills that children needed to develop. We'll have a Q&A, and then we've also got some resources that we will link throughout the slides, and you'll also get some resources in the follow-up email that we will send out after this. I just want to point out that this course doesn't come with a certificate. That course is yet to come. I'm working on building it at the moment, but you will hopefully learn quite a lot that you can still apply in your classrooms. Also, if anybody has any hearing impairments or would need this session transcribed for you, just let me know, just pop it in the chat box and we can have Ross, who's very kindly volunteered to transcribe the sessions, but there would be a lot of text on the slide, so hopefully there's enough for everybody to read as well. So I want to start off with a quick true or false, just to sort of debunk or confirm some of the myths that you might have heard about autism before. So I just want to start with the first question of autism affects more boys than girls. So if you can pop your answers in the chat box, whether you think that's true or false. I've got one true so far, false. Okay, a lot of you are starting to think it's true. It is true. The sort of statistics around it say that it's more of a 4-to-1 ratio. So boys are typically diagnosed more than girls, but that's not to say that girls don't necessarily have autism less. It's that they will present in a different way. Lots of girls are misdiagnosed as having mental health conditions or having anxiety or having OCD. And so girls are typically also better at what we call masking, so that they can actually sort of present more neurotypically because they can sort of imitate people who are neurotypical around them. Approximately 1/3 of children with autism are non-verbal. What do we think on that one? I've got one true. This might be a little bit tricky. A couple of trues, maybe half. So this was true. This was actually quite surprising for me. I've mostly worked in special schools where all the children were non-verbal, but obviously you have many more children who attend mainstream schools. But yeah, according to the National Autistic Society, approximately 1/3 of children with autism are non-verbal and will use different means of communication, which we'll come on to later. Going on to more like the genetics of autism, there's a single gene for autism, meaning obviously if you have that gene, you would then get autism or have autism. Got a lot of falses. Got one true, false. So this is false. The research that's going into sort of the genetics or the foundations of autism is still ongoing. There is speculation that there are hundreds of mutations or genetics that are involved in a child being diagnosed with autism or having autism from birth. And you know, they're still looking at sort of environmental factors as well, but it's still ongoing. But I think it's safe to say at the moment that there is no one single gene for autism, unlike some other conditions that children can have. Controversial one, the MMR, which is the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, causes autism. A few of you might remember the paper that was published, and I'm very happy to see that everyone's saying false. Yeah, this is a really controversial one, as there was a medical professional who did publish a paper saying that the MMR vaccine causes autism. It's entirely false. It does not cause autism, and that paper has been removed from journals. The doctor has lost his license, but obviously it did have a lot of impact on young parents or parents of that era deciding not to vaccinate their children, which has different medical repercussions, but it's not been linked to causing autism at all. And finally, approximately 700,000 people, so that's including children, young people and adults, have autism in the UK. That one is true. Obviously hard to sort of, you know, say that's people with a full diagnosis that has, you know, been clinically given. Obviously that I'm sure we have plenty more people who have got undiagnosed autism, but that's the latest statistics from the NAS, which is the National Autistic Society. So it looks like everybody has quite a good understanding of these main subject areas at the moment. And now we're going to go on to learning a bit more about why it's important we learn about how to support children with autism. Just some statistics. So it's said that 6 out of 10 children and actually 7 out of 10 parents say that the main improvement they want in schools is people who understand autism. But actually 60% of teachers have said that they haven't got adequate training on this. You know, people who've been through more sort of newer initial teacher trainings or PGCEs may have had more support on SEN, but certainly from what I've heard from teachers who've done it a couple of years ago or you know, quite a while ago, there was very little covered in the course when it comes to adapting lessons for children with additional needs. Primary age children with autism are twice as likely to experience bullying, obviously having impact on their learning, on their mental health and their general well-being. 40% of parents have said that the school does not effectively support the child's needs. So that child is potentially not meeting the expectations that they have, and not meeting the developmental milestones that they may have, they should be reaching, if they did have people who understood autism a little bit better. Only 1 in 6 people with autism are in full-time employment, but there's many careers and opportunities for people with autism where they could flourish. And because potentially autism is such a misunderstood condition, people aren't able to make the right adaptations for their workplace in order to employ more people with autism who could offer, fantastic skills to their chosen career path. And a third of adults have reported that they have serious mental health difficulties later in life, and that could link back from their experiences at primary school, from secondary school, and just generally the world not understanding the different needs that they have. And so it's really important that we learn strategies and techniques in order to make the world a safer place for children with autism, and also allow them to access all kinds of things that they can do, rather than sort of trying to hide them from what they can't do. Oh, and yeah, 40% of people, 40% of parents that I've actually just put that twice. Cool. So what is autism? So before I go on to the actual definition of what it is, I really want to go through some terminology and wording, because it's really important. It is debated quite a lot within the field. So you'll see a couple of acronyms: ASD, ASC, autism spectrum disorder or condition. And then there's a sort of a separate diagnosis called Asperger's syndrome or Asperger's syndrome, which is typically where children are defined as being high functioning autistic or high functioning autism. Children with Asperger's syndrome generally more struggle with the difficulties in communication and social relationships, but they are nearly always verbal, and can actually function at a really high ability. So quite a lot of CEOs, or quite a lot of people in Silicon Valley, quite a lot of people in academics would probably be diagnosed as having Asperger's syndrome. When it comes to wording, it's really important that we use inclusive language for everything, whether that's a disability, your race, your gender, your sexuality, and it's to help everybody feel included, welcomed, and proud of who they are. So I typically, these are the ones that I sort of have a bit of a bugbear about. I don't like to use the word normal, because what is normal? So if I wouldn't say, like, oh, he's not a normal child, or they're not a normal child, typically say, they're a mainstream child, or they're neurotypical. Suffers from, again, like, that implies that they have a really challenging, hard life, and that they're, potentially depressed and things like that. And obviously there are challenges, but I would simply say he has autism or is autistic, rather than suffers from autism. When you're sort of talking about your experiences, instead of saying you dealt with a child, that again has a bit of a negative connotation, you supported somebody. Mental health issues or problems, or behavioural issues and behavioural problems, difficulties or challenges. And then autistic children with autism, children on the autism spectrum, it's really up to the individual. Some people really don't like saying I'm a child with autism, because actually autism is part of who I am. So I want to be an autistic child, or an autistic young person. But for some, they actually say, like, no, I do want to separate that, because the autism doesn't define who I am. So really, it's key to understand what that child or young person wants to be called, and sort of understand how you can use positive, inclusive language around them. So autism, right, finally getting onto it. So autism is a lifelong developmental disability, and it primarily affects how a person communicates, relates to, and makes sense of the world around them, and relates to other people. It is a spectrum disorder, and it can range from very mild autism and high functioning, like Asperger's syndrome, to severe, where you would have children typically in special schools who are non-verbal, require a lot of care, potentially have sensory needs as well, and need quite a lot of support in terms of their day-to-day functioning. Impairments in social interaction, communication, and imagination, and we'll come on to more of that in a second. They often have very restrictive, repetitive patterns of behaviour, thinking, interests and activities. So I'm sure that you'll have seen children with autism complete the same activity over and over and over again, or watch the same part of a video over and over and over again. And we'll go into sort of why that happens. And it's approximately 1.1 of the population, 1 in every 100, 700,000 people in the UK who have a diagnosis of autism. So this is a really great infographic that I've found, and it sort of splits what they call the triad of impairments. So the impairments in imagination. So this can not only be about imagining, potential things or storylines in their head, but it can also be things about other people's feelings. It can be flexible thinking in terms of routine. They need to have things really structured, and if actually something goes out of their normal routine, it can really agitate them. Social relationships, sort of coming into understanding non-verbal behaviour, things like eye contact or body language, tone of voice. They may be unaware of different ways to interact with different people. So how you speak to your friends is very different to how you speak to your boss. And that will come into the communication side, where they can sometimes not be able to read between the lines of a conversation. They can make factual comments in more of like an emotional conversation. Or they communicate their own needs rather than a social engagement. And then at the bottom, you've got additional difficulties, which we're going to come on to in more detail, certainly around the sensory needs as well. This should work, yes. So I've got a great video from a lovely lady called Temple Grandin, and she's going to explain, hopefully if I've got the sound working, she's going to explain her journey of being diagnosed with autism at a very young age, but also how she's overcome the challenges that initially she was sort of said that she would never overcome. And actually she's gone on to have an incredible life. So hopefully, if I unplug my headphones, this should work.
Autism. But what you do is you learn about her, is you learn more and more things. Well, I didn't speak until I was 4. Now I have a BA and a master's, and I'm studying for my doctorate. I can remember the frustration of not being able to talk. I couldn't get my words out. My speech came in gradually, a few words at a time. When I was a little kid, I was very autistic, nonverbal, rocking. That's the kind of kid they just put away in the institution. But I had a speech teacher that worked really hard with me, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of young children getting early intervention. You got a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, no speech. Wait. Absolutely worst part of my life. For throwing a book at a girl, teasing me. Teasing really made my life miserable, and the only places I could get away from teasing was specialized activities, things like horseback riding, electronics lab, model rocket club. The line was drawn in the sand. I was not allowed to become a recluse in my room. I had to get out and do things. I'm always kind of baffled at just how illogical people are in their thinking. I'm very logical in my thinking. But when I was younger, I didn't know that other people thought more in words. You see, I think in pictures. If I don't have a picture, I don't think. And my mind is very, very associative. Being a visual thinker, I tend to put things into categories. Autism is a very big spectrum. One end of the spectrum is Silicon Valley. Then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got somebody who's very handicapped, remains nonverbal, is live in a supervised living situation. Really, really big spectrum. And Einstein would probably be labeled autistic today in a lot of school systems because he had no speech until age 3. I'm interested in seeing something that makes real change. I've done a lot of work, made a lot of improvements in the livestock industry, and I think I've helped a lot of kids succeed. I want to see the kids that are like me succeed. That's the kind of stuff that makes me happy. When I see the things that I do make a difference.
Cool. So it's a really interesting video from Temple there, as she sort of goes on about her experiences as a child. Obviously, she said that she was teased relentlessly, but she's also had lots of input from the speech and language therapists and people who really cared about her and really sort of made more things accessible to her in terms of the activities that she said there, horseback riding, the electronic stuff. They tapped into what she was good at and really flourished that. And she's now gone on to, as she said there, she's got a master's, she's got a doctorate, she's made incredible contributions to the world in terms of agriculture. And I think she's also written a book, I think it's called Thinking in Pictures, which is what she said there, where she's very, very visual in the way that she thinks. She can picture a farm or blueprints, or she's very big in the slaughterhouse industry. She can picture exactly how to build one just from thinking about it. So I highly recommend looking at that. Or Charlie's just made a great recommendation about the film, which is starring Claire Danes. So that's the clip that you saw there, which again goes on about Temple's life. Oh no, don't start again. There we go. And then this is another lovely graph that I love, which is, it really explains what autism is. People do think that when I say it's a spectrum disorder, it's just like you're less or you're more autistic. But actually, it's a really multifaceted condition where you can have real strengths in a certain area. So it could be language, but actually you've got real impairments in sensory and perception. It's really about understanding how does autism present in an individual child. It's not a blanket condition where it affects everybody the same way. And once you understand the challenges and the areas that a young person or a child succeeds at, you can really help them unlock more potential and obviously adapt to all of your lessons to meet their specific individual needs. So communication difficulties is a key one in terms of an impairment that children with autism struggle with. They can struggle with both verbal and non-verbal communication. So that's obviously speech, but also understanding eye contact, body language, and it's really hard for them potentially to communicate their needs and their wants and emotions. So there's typically 4 stages of communication development, and those of you have children of your own, you may have seen these. You've got the own gender, where they are uninterested in other people and they just want to do things on their own. So typically sort of very young children will happily play on their own for hours on end. You've got the requester, where children then become to realise that their actions do have an impact on other people. And so this is where you might have a toddler, or again a child with sort of pre-verbal come up and take your hand and drag you to what you want, what they want you to do, what they want from you. The early communicator, they may echo things that you hear, that they hear even, and quite a few children with autism will have something called echolalia, which is where they repeat things that they've heard before. If any of you have seen the documentary about Harvey Price, Katie Price's son, he has echolalia insofar as he will repeat the train announcements. He's got a fascination with trains, so he will repeat the train announcements at Waterloo Station. They can, at this stage, start to shift their eye gaze, so start to look at what they want, and also engage in a two-way interaction with another person. And the partner, which is where they start to hold a simple conversation with somebody that they trust and somebody that they know. But this may regress into an earlier stage of communication if they're in an unfamiliar environment with somebody that they don't know. So they may go back to the requester, where they just pull somebody to what they want. So it's key to understand where is this young person at their stage of communication, and what can we do to help them communicate what they need, what they want, or how they're feeling. So some things that we can deploy in your classroom is obviously just always use the student's name. It'll help direct attention that you are speaking directly to them, and that what you're about to say is something that they need to act on. Use really simple language and short instructions. I think as adults, sometimes we take for granted how much we say in one sentence and how many filler words we put in, when actually we can just say 2 or 3 words and we'll get the same message across. So for example, instead of saying, please come in and put your coat on the rack or put your coat on the hook, you can just say, come in as the first sentence, and then coat up. Like, you know, that's all they need to know. And you can sort of gesture to what you need them to do. You could have other children modeling what they need to do as well, but really try to decrease the amount of verbal input that you're giving them to comprehend. Using picture symbols like the ones that you've got on the right hand side is great for communicating. It's called PECS, which is Picture Exchange Communication System. Makaton is a simple sign language used a lot by children who are nonverbal. So all of these symbols will also have a sign that goes with it, and a lot of them are very sort of common sense. So to drink or to eat, very simple. Or an iPad has been a fantastic way as well, and a lot of schools will have iPads or technology-assisted communication systems to help children communicate. And the iPad can be incredible in terms of unlocking potential. I had a young person who was nonverbal for 15, 16 years, incredibly challenging in his behavior, and was nonverbal. And because of his challenging behavior, we typically didn't allow anything that was breakable or valuable around him, because he would typically just smash it if he got frustrated. But one day he got hold of an iPad and opened up the Notes app and just started typing in full sentences completely at the sort of level of a 15, 16-year-old, and was asking questions about the Scottish referendum. Obviously, this was a long time ago, but he was asking things about politics. He was asking things about college that he was going to, and it was a whole new world for him. And it really opened up a new way for us to talk to him, and for him to communicate what he wanted throughout the day. And from that, his behavior decreased because he wasn't so frustrated about just sort of being pulled around doing what we were asking him to do. He had autonomy again. Allow them extra time to process things, just an extra 10 seconds or so for them to take in that information, and then to process, do they need to act on it or do they need to respond to it? Repeat the instructions if needed, but use the same words and the same phrasing so that you're not going to confuse them by thinking that you're asking two different things. Offer choices. So rather than saying, what do you want to drink? Well, they might request tea, and tea isn't available to them, and then they'll get frustrated that you offered them a choice, but you didn't tell them what the options were. So you can offer them water or juice, and then they've still got the choice of making that decision. They've still got the autonomy and the control, but you are giving them an option that is still going to happen either way. And avoid using sarcasm, idioms, and rhetorical questions, as that sometimes children with autism will, again, as part of the communication, struggle to read between the lines. And so sort of saying something like pull your socks up, as to sort of get going and start working, they might literally try and pull their socks up, and they take things very, very literally. Using positive instructions. Positivity is really important, obviously, for mental well-being, but also reinforcing the things that we do want them to do. So a lot of the time as adults, and I'm sure you might have seen this with your own children, is if they're about to do something you don't want them to do, the natural reaction is just go, don't do that, no, stop it, things like that. But if they keep hearing no, don't, stop, it can be quite damaging for them, and they actually want to know, what can I do? So instead of saying something like stop running, show me careful walking. Or if instead of mustn't kick, keep your feet still. Like tell them exactly what you do want them to do. And then when they model that behavior, you can reinforce it with a motivator, or you can reinforce it with a star chart, or however you want to reinforce that behavior. But it's really key for children with autism to learn behaviors that will be helpful for them in the classroom. And also one other thing that sort of, I don't know whether it's that common, but a lot of children will typically just hear the last word of the sentence that you're about to say. So if you say stop running, they're going to run, because all they've heard is running. And so if we can always just keep in mind what we do want them to display, then we'll hopefully get all that behaviour. Next interactive activity. So we're moving on to sensory impairments. So I just wanted to sort of highlight what are some of the smells or the sights or the sounds that you really, really don't like, that sort of, get your back up, or you sort of cringe a little bit when you hear or see or smell them. For me, I can't stand the touch of like mushy banana. I also don't like the smell of petrol. And I don't like, what's the sound? I don't know. I don't like people clicking their knuckles or like sort of clicking their necks. That really gets me up. So it'd be interesting to sort of hear what you guys think as well. got hand sanitizer as being one, which is sorry for the last year and a half, essentially, if that's if you're struggling with that. Loud traffic, smell of petrol is a really common one. It's so just overwhelming. It's horrible. Loud voices, chalk on or nails on a chalkboard, people chewing. That's got a name and I can't remember what it's called now, but there is a scientific name for the sound of people chewing. It's a whole range of things, and it just shows that, you know, we are all sensitive to different sights and sounds and smells and touches and all kinds of things. And children with autism are exactly the same, except they might feel these things at 10 times the power that we do, and they might feel them all at the same time. So lots of students will have difficulty in processing the sensory information. They might be hyper, obviously, where they're oversensitive, or hyposensitive, where they're undersensitive. And one issue with hyposensitivity is pain, where they could be self-injuring, and I'll come on to that behaviour later, but they actually can't feel that pain. So they may be doing real damage to themselves, but they can't feel it. And obviously this can affect their behaviour. Imagine if I don't like the smell of petrol, if I had to do a 15-minute lesson in a petrol station, I'd probably go a little bit crazy. And so you can just imagine, you know, we need to make these environments sensory safe for all of our children. So if you've got a child who might be sound sensitive, they might put their fingers in their ears, they might hum, they might scream. And a lot of children, or a lot of my teachers and TAs have reported, how do I stop a child screaming? It's their way of communicating to you that there's something wrong, that they are trying to block out whatever they are hearing by their own scream. Every behaviour is a communication tool. Different behaviour in quiet and noisy environments. So if you're in a crowd and they behave differently when they're in a quiet sensory room, there's probably, again, you know, something to consider. They might not like loud noises. Visual sensitivity, again, closing or covering the eyes, turning away from certain sights, or actually intensely looking at them. We have, in my school, we have a really large bubble tube that goes from the floor to the ceiling with lots of lights, lots of bubbles, all toys floating up and down. And a lot of the children you will see have their noses like right up against it. And they are fascinated. They'll sit there for hours and do that. So they could be really, you know, visually sensitive to pretty lights and colours. Tactile, recoiling from touch, attempting to remove certain items of clothing. Certainly, I've had that with a few boys in my classes before, where they're really sensitive to the labels in the backs of clothing, and they sort of scratch, and it'll be like not just like an irritable itchy, it's like they're scratching their skin, so they might try and strip in class. And avoiding certain textures, which can also include food. So some children with autism will have a really restrictive diet because they can't stand the texture of certain foods. Like I don't eat bananas if they're mushed up, and I probably won't ever. But some children with autism might love that, and they might only have pureed food, for example. So some sensory processing strategies we can use. Consider your closeness, and that's just a respect of personal space. We are a lot bigger than children, so we don't want to be over their shoulders, or you know, sitting right next to them all the time, looking over their shoulders, etc. Just respect their personal space, and just, you know, always, if you're going to come down to their level, look at, you know, crouch down rather than bending over. Promote a quiet and calm classroom, just for general peace and quiet, really, but also to ensure that everything that you're saying is getting across to that student. Avoid wearing bright colours and clothing, or strong perfumes and colognes. This can be really distracting visually if you've got lots of bright patterns all over your clothes or over your displays as well. I think I've got that coming. But perfume is a big one. The olfactory sense is one of the biggest triggers for memory. It's part of the limbic system, which is connected to your memory. And we did have a young person at one of my previous schools where she never was challenging in her behaviour at all. She was really, really calm. She was a young person in Key Stage 4, but she had come from quite a difficult home background. And one day a new member of staff came into school wearing cologne, and she went for him, really, really lashed out. and we couldn't understand why, but it turned out that he was wearing the same cologne of somebody who had previously sexually abused her, and it triggered obviously a really traumatic memory, and her response was fight rather than flight, and so it's really, we just need to be considerate of these things as well. Some sensory toys. Charlie's got a great slide on that, so I'll leave that for you. Noise cancelling headphones are lovely. They really do cancel out absolutely everything. And they also squeeze the head, which is quite nice for children with autism. They do like to be squeezed. Sunglasses as well. Weighted blankets are wonderful. They really make somebody feel centered. And yeah, avoiding bright and busy displays on the wall as a distraction. Stimming. Stimming might be something you've heard of before. So it's typically where children will repeat the same behavior over and over again, and everybody stims in one way or another. I know when I'm nervous, I'll play with something in my hands, or I'll play with a pen, or I'll twirl my hair, things like that. Lots of children with autism will display the similar behaviors. They might bite the back of their hands, etc. But everybody does it. I always ask myself, well, why is this child stimming? Why is this person engaging in this behavior? And I have to learn the certain triggers. If it's because they're getting upset, I learned that, okay, I'm going to preempt that they might start this kind of behavior if they're in this situation. Teach safe stims. I'll come on to some self-injurious behavior strategies in a second, but teach them safe ways to stim that they're not going to hurt themselves or other people. Finding stimulation toys can promote calmness. Again, that'll come over in the sensory box. And it's really, really important, but do not restrain a child if they're stimming. If they're harming themselves, we'll come on to that in a second, but it's really important that you don't restrain them or try and force their hands down to stop them, because they are, again, they're trying to tell you something. And it's our job to find out why. The need for routine. I'm sure you'll have all come across this, but children with autism find the world really chaotic and confusing. And so the need for structure and routine is really important. This is from one of our schools in Bermondsey. So they have workspaces for the children with their photo. So exactly they know where to go and where to work. All of the things are labeled so that they go back in exactly the same place. They know exactly where to find them. And classrooms are clutter free. Classroom is for learning. They want to know that when they're in a certain environment, what is expected of them. So when I'm in the classroom, I learn, I engage in activities. When I'm in the ICT suite, because it's full of computers, I'm on the computer, example, and same for the library, same for everywhere. And we need to create this structured routine by helping them have a really clear idea of what's going to happen throughout the day. So key, and the most fundamental thing I would say for any child, is having a visual timetable. I've got some examples on the next slide, but it's really, really helpful to help them feel more at ease with what's going to happen throughout that day. Having a now and next board, again, I've got an example coming up. Always talk through what you're doing, but also why you're doing it. Again, sort of giving them the context on the situation rather than just saying, we're going inside. If it starts raining, we're going inside. Why though? I can play in the rain, I don't mind getting wet, but your job as a teacher or TA is not to let them get wet and potentially put them at risk of having a cold. So we're going inside because it's raining. We can now play in the sensory room, things like that. And students will often struggle with transitions and change, and that could be a huge transition. It could be going into a new school. It could be going back to school from COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. It could be change from one lesson to another. It really varies. But we can help them prepare by describing the change clearly and using social stories. We can give them time warnings. So this is really helpful for if things are going to happen imminently. So if a lesson's coming to finish, I always say, art finishes in 5 minutes, and then I'll do 4, 3, 2, 1 minutes, etc. Or one thing that has worked quite well for me is if a child is refusing to something you need them to do immediately, like stand up, if they're just sat on the floor and you need them to stand up, I might just take their hands gently and say, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, Sam standing up, and sort of gently pull him up, but it just sort of gives him that 5 seconds to prepare for a change that he knows is then going to happen. Using timers, sand timers are everywhere in special schools, but it could be a stopwatch, it could be a digital clock, it could be anything. But you can turn them upside down in front of a child to say, like, you know, when the sand finishes, this is when art finishes or maths finishes. And using visual aids, certainly for like a new school transition, and they're included in social stories, photos of new rooms or new people that they'll be encountering. And preparing a favourite box to help them settle in. So that might be their favourite STEM toys, it might be a picture of their old classroom, it might be a picture of their friends, just to help them feel more at home. And here are some timetables. So you may have one for an individual, where it's quite basic, like, you know, lesson 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or it might be more complex, where it's actually got things scheduled in throughout the day about playtime, about toilet breaks, about snack time, or lunchtime, etc. And then you've got these now and next boards, which are really helpful to have on the table or on a lanyard, so that the child can see what's coming next up. And then social stories. So this is one used by the school I work with in North London, to sort of help them go back to school. This would have been sent home to parents to explain to the child, okay, this is what has happened now. I've been closed because of coronavirus. But now it's not spreading, and now it's safe to go back to school. And so that's, rather than just sort of saying like, oh, Monday you're going back, it helps them explain the context as to what's happening and why. As we said earlier, intense interests. Lots of children will have a really, really intense interest around a topic or an activity or anything. Collection seems to be really popular, where they'll collect certain items, and they will typically become an expert on this area, which they will love to tell you about at all times. But try to help them be flexible in sharing their interests. If they are talking about buses all day, every day, it can get a little bit, you know, tiring for you, tiring for other children. So it is okay to intervene if their behaviour is actually affecting another child and their playtime. Find other children within the school to help facilitate friendships. So you could help them buddy up with people who have the same interest, but also use them to help them learn. So if you've got a child who's obsession with trains, you can count the seats in maths. You could do the addition of subtraction of ticket prices in more complex maths, or you could talk to them about storytelling, about a journey in English, for example. Lots of different ways in which you can share them. Challenging behaviour. So that's a really common question that we get, is how do I manage challenging behaviour? And children with autism will have a meltdown, but it could be for a number of reasons. They could be frustrated, overstimulated, understimulated, bored, or just completely like, I can't communicate any other way to you. They're not the same as temper tantrums, and they shouldn't be seen as naughty behaviour. It's a very different thing, a temper tantrum versus a meltdown. The most important thing is just give them space and time. It will take a long time to recover from a meltdown, and they can take a while to sort of come back to sort of baseline operation level. But give them the space to calm down. Make sure it's quiet. Make sure it's, you know, safe for them. It might be a soft play room. It might be a spare classroom that you've got, away from others, and also away from other sensory triggers. Anticipate the meltdown, so they might start stimming before they go into a meltdown, so you can, you know, take them out of a situation before it gets to the meltdown point. Remember sensory considerations, again, like, don't be too close to them all the time or trying to restrain them, or you know, anything like that. Some children might engage in self-injurious behavior, so that's where they are actually self-harming themselves. And it could be, again, for a number of reasons. They're not being listened to, they're told off, they have no choice, or actually the choice you gave them is no longer available. And some people with autism have said that actually self-harming is the only way I can tell you I'm really, really upset and I'm really frustrated, because you're just not listening to me otherwise. So what can we do when a child is self-harming? And I know it's really hard to watch and hear and see a child who is self-harming because they are so upset, and trust me, they don't hold back, they don't go light. I have many children actually in my old school who would knock themselves out after headbanging against a wall. And so it's definitely difficult, but we can do things to intervene. Firstly is be quick, regardless if you think it's for attention or if you think it's a genuine cry for help. Always respond. You need to remain calm, and that is, making sure that you're not shouting, you're not raising your voice, you're not panicking, you're remaining really neutral, you're talking to them in a calm manner, and that you are trying to de-escalate the situation. You reduce the sensory demands, you remove sensory discomfort. So if you've been trying to get a child to do an activity for 40 minutes and now they've started self-harming, forget that activity. You are not going to get them to engage in that anymore. Take them out of the classroom, take them out of any sensory areas that might be distracting for them, and just create a really calm environment. Redirect and distract even, really helpful. Like, even if you're distracting them with a toy, it might seem like reward, but trust me, it's better than them self-harming. Redirect them to a new activity that you know that they will engage with, and it might still have the same outcome. Providing light physical guidance. So if they are starting to quite a common one is biting this part of their hand, biting the back of their hand. So you might just sort of gently just push their hand out. Like, don't push, but like just sort of gently, like, put their hands back down on their lap, and that's it. Like, keep doing that a couple of times. And only ever consider physical restraint if you are trained or if you're under the guidance of a supervisor. Never ever hold a child down, or just don't restrain them. You should always be Team Teach trained, or MAPA trained, or any kind of other physical intervention trained, if you are going to do that, and make sure that it's in line with that school's policy and that child's plan as well. So I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to hand over to Charly, who's going to talk through some top tips for teachers that she's had in her classrooms before.
Cool, thanks, Liv. Yeah, I just thought I'd give you a few tips that I found really useful. I used to do supply, and then also, like, with the sort of longer term position I had at school, I would sort of go in between classrooms, so I wouldn't always have the same set of students, and this would sort of change quite a bit. So sometimes you don't fully know what to expect, and if you've got a few of these ideas, sometimes it can just make you feel a bit more prepared for the maybe unexpected. But yeah, basically the main thing is structure every single part of your lesson, and use strategies and techniques that you can learn from occupational therapists, speech and language therapists. I don't know if you're lucky enough to have one on hand at your school that you work at, but quite often they work with a child like once every couple of weeks. That's great, but like we saw with Temple Grandin's experience, like the more input and the more sort of frequent you can put these techniques in place, the better outcomes you're going to get for that child. If that child can communicate better, if they can regulate themselves better, they're going to be happier. These behaviors are going to diminish because they have the tools they need to communicate with you properly. So yeah, bookending the session with a couple of grounding activities that I'm going to show you is yeah, really useful. First thing I'm going to talk about is a sensory box. You might have seen these being used, but we'll talk quickly about how to make one yourself. The next one is a strategy called colourful semantics. Speech and language therapists use this, and it can just really bring the kids on from maybe using 1 or 2 PECs, can bring them on to creating their own sentences. And it's just a really good way to build autonomy. And then finally, calm time. I love this one. It really helps with, like Liv mentioned before, about transitioning from one thing to another, where the sensory box can be a really good place to start. Calm time is a really good place to finish, and everyone's sort of together and at the right level of kind of arousal that they are ready to do the next thing. I've got a couple of resource links here, but I think we're going to send these to you in an email after the session, so don't worry too much. These are things that I've basically used in these slides, so we'll send them over to you. Sensory box, it's brilliant. I don't know how much I can kind of go on about it. Arm yourself with one. If you're a TA, arm yourself with one, because there's going to be a situation where you might have a small group at playtime. Is it wet play, or are you waiting for a teacher to come into a lesson? Maybe they've had to swap, maybe an incident has happened. No worries, you've got a sensory box, you're in control, you've got a great activity to bring the kids together or to keep them occupied or feed into their sensory diet. You can make it completely sort of random sensory toys from the pound shop, or you can make it very, very specific to your lesson. You can make a music related one. It could be all around the Gruffalo book that you're doing at the moment. It could be the science topic that you're doing, and you could build, loads of magnets and stuff like that in there. The possibilities are endless, and it doesn't just have to be something that fills time. It can be something that builds vocabulary for a topic. It's it's encouraging sort of communication, but also feeding into sensory diet needs. On the right hand side here, I've put, if you just go back a little bit just for a moment, the choice board that I've put on here, like it's really, really good that you sort of know about like visual timetables and all of these amazing, like really cool resources that make the kids' lives so much better. But sometimes you don't have access to communication in print, which is a program that has all these symbols and things made up for you. You might not have access to that. So if you're a TA and you're going into a new school and it's an SEN school, it's like, oh, what? Maybe I want to make my own sensory choice card with a little box, but I don't know how. Don't worry, I got you. There's a website called opensymbols.org, and I made this because I don't have access to communication in print or anything because I don't work at a school anymore, but I used this website to make this choice board on PowerPoint. So you can make a little table, you can use Comic Sans or a font that's really easy for I think Comic Sans is the one that's the easiest for kids with dyslexia to read, because the A's are like regular A's, like you would write them. So yeah, just a top tip there. If you go to the next slide, this is what the website looks like. You basically there's a search bar. If you've got a cooking lesson or something, cool, I want to make a choice board. So I've got all the food and all the bits and pieces, and I want the kids to ask me individually, like, I want an onion, please, like, I want a knife. You can make these boards really, really easily with this website, and it's completely free. No one's going to charge you an extortionate amount. You don't have to sign up for anything. It's just completely free. And I love that, because sometimes that's the biggest problem, right? You want to make all these great resources and you just don't have the means to. So that's a big win. For the kind of main part of your lesson, get into colourful semantics. It's a really, really great way to sort of build on what PECS does so well. It's an approach developed by Alice and Brian, and it's basically sort of a nice colour-coded scaffold to teach kids. I always forget the term for this, but word classes. But not necessarily just teaching them this is a noun, this is a verb. You can build up to that, but this is a really good way to show, okay, we put this here and we put that there, and that's what makes a sentence. I would use this all the time, and there's 4 colors here, but you can expand on this for making longer sentences, adverbs, adjectives, conjunctions and stuff. But it's a really, really good starting point if you've got a bunch of kids who are using like 1 or 2 PECs. I use this in my classroom all the time, and kids just really, really feel confident that they can build longer sentences after this. So if you want to go to the next slide, I mean, it's worth saying as well, like, this is something that I picked up from speech and language. If you can, go to speech and language therapy sessions with your kids if you're not allowed to, record them. This stuff is so valuable, and you need to be doing it all the time if you really want your kids to improve and develop. Yeah, I just thought I'd show a little example here. Like, you know, you can use this for anything. I've got the sentence scaffold here in the background, and then some symbols that are like different bits of vocab. So the child can choose from the vocab the most appropriate symbol that they either want to communicate with you. Maybe it was about their weekend, i.e. a picnic at the park. Maybe you've got a photo for them that you want to describe. Maybe you're talking about like writing a story, and you've got lots of different options, and they can make up their own stories and sentences. It's just, it can be used in so many ways. You can use it at the end of the lesson to recap what you did. It's just brilliant. And you can print these out. That would be great. You can have them on a USB stick, and the kids can use them on an interactive whiteboard. Many, many possibilities. So yeah, like once you've made your sentence using this scaffold, it's so many things. You know, you can, the child can take this to you, and that's their way of communicating, or it could be a prompt for them to speak to you. It could be a prompt for them to sign to you. It could be a sentence strip that will help flesh out a full sentence. They could be practicing their handwriting. You could be storytelling with this, you know, comprehension checks, like I said. It can be a group activity. Like it changed my sort of way of teaching, and I could see the progress that the kids made with this, because just having those colors there gives them so much more confidence to be way more autonomous. So can't stress it, recommend it highly enough. And yeah, the last bit, like I love, you know, after you sort of recapped what you've done in the lesson, I love having a bit of time to just really get grounded again. Like I said, to prepare yourself for the next transition. This could be, I loved this again, I made this schedule for calm time just the other day with that open symbols and like in PowerPoint, I think, or Word. And, you know, you can go through and count to 10 and do sort of breathing in and out and doing these sort of simple stretches. It's a really, really nice way to end the lesson. Again, but it's structured. Everybody knows what they're going to do next. Everyone can see. You could make a similar thing with some of these yoga positions. These are sort of quite young kids. You know, you could probably find different positions, like photos of them, and make it a bit more age appropriate depending on the kids that you're working with. Or you could use that time for specific individual sensory diet stuff, like, you know, heavy work, or maybe a child has a brushing schedule. You know, find out about what the kids already have in place and just make sure it goes into every lesson, because like I said, lots of these behaviors and things are quite often a result of needing something. And if you're giving the kids the opportunity to explore that and fulfill those sensory needs, then you'll have kids who are sort of ready to learn. So yeah, that's what I got.
Awesome, thank you so much, Charly. And that actually really nicely brings us to the end of the session. So we're going to pause and sort of take some time for questions. I appreciate we have gone slightly over time, but thank you all for sticking with us. Ross, I believe you've got some questions that were collated for us on the sign-up sheet.
I do, yeah. So I'll start off with sending those questions your way, and then we can go on to live questions. Cool. So the first question that came through is, how can we stop a pupil with ASD from getting violent or trying to run away? And what can we do if they're already doing this?
I mean, I think we did cover obviously some strategies about how to manage violent behaviours and self-injurious behaviours, and the same things can be applied if they are trying to harm you as well. I think my my biggest top tip, and I know it's hard to employ, is to really remain calm. If you start getting worked up, and I know it's hard if you've got someone trying to bite your arm, but if you get worked up, it also makes them feel scared, which can also then lead them to actually becoming more aggressive. The biggest thing is to distract and redirect, like redirect that energy and that attention somewhere else immediately. Like forget what you were trying to engage them on in terms of that lesson. Just get them to do something else that they can engage in. If it, you know, it might look like rewarding bad behavior, but it's not. It's really just making sure that they are safe first and foremost, but also having some needs met as well. I don't know if you want to chime in, Charly.
Yeah, like you sort of mentioned before, violence is always a communication of something. So you might need to react to the immediate response in whatever the best way that you can, but you need to look more closely at like the antecedent, which is like why it's happening, and that is a longer journey, and that does sort of take a little bit more time, and you know, that's something that you'll have to work with all the adults in the class. But like for running away, it's like I just wanted to share a story about one of the kids I taught who was really big on running away, running out of the classroom. Loved the drama, you know, the chase was great. Luckily, the school was a secure school, so there was nowhere that this child would be able to run to that they would hurt themselves. And we also had classrooms that did open doors straight out into the playground. We're not going to lock doors, that's not a nice thing to do, but what we did was think, well, why is this happening? This kid's obviously not very comfortable in the class for whatever reason. And after trying quite a few different things, we put his desk just outside the classroom, so we could see him. He could spend as much time out there as he needed to, and gradually, like all of his resources for the lesson were there on his desk, and he'd spend, you know, a little bit more time there, get a reward, you know, and we built up that time that he would spend at his desk just outside the classroom, and then that eventually, after a very long time, turned into a bit more time in the classroom, in a room not with everybody else, and eventually working on a table with other kids. So these things take a really, really long time, and you have to be prepared that it's not going to be a linear journey, but you just have to be really sensitive and sort of build on successes, basically.
Yeah, I think you raised a really good point there, Charly. Like, things will take a long time. None of this is going to happen overnight or in a couple of weeks. Like I said, with my young person, it took 16 years for us to find his way of communicating. So you will have a very up and down journey whenever you're trying to help a child develop a skill in terms of like staying in the classroom. But just stick at it. I think it's really important for consistency, in terms of like everybody who works with that child or young person commits to the same thing. And also a story from one of my kids, and also something I learned on my Team Teach training, is you've got two different types of runners. You've got runners who will just run about the school, but they will never try and leave school. Then you've got like real runners who will run a marathon away from you if they really had the chance to. Those are the ones that you need to really, really watch out for. And I think if you know that you have a child who would run, I lost a child at Alton Towers once. That was horrific, because he was a real runner, and he tried to get out of the park. But if you have a child who would really run away from you, again, absolutely inquire as to why, but have somebody looking after that child one-to-one nearly all the time, just to make sure that they can't get out, because also they are very, very clever, and they will find small little locks or small ways that they can get through open doors or small cracks in windows. And trust me, if they really have an intent on running away from the school, they will find a way to do it. So be very conscious.
Very interesting, thank you. And the next question is, how can we encourage an ASD pupil to participate?
I think multitude of different ways. Obviously, make things relevant for them. Again, like if they've got a really big interest in a certain area, use that. That can be really engaging. But also, we know that we can't make every lesson relevant to one of their interests, because that just wouldn't be adaptable also when they grow up. But one thing that works with pupils in a school I do supply at is having a motivator. So that is an activity or a toy or something that they can use for 5 minutes once they've completed 15 minutes of an activity. So if we were doing handwriting, for example, if they can copy some handwriting sentences into their workbook and do it well, and concentrate and sit still and, you know, sort of do all the things that we expect them to do, then they can have 5 minutes of their iPad, or they can have 5 minutes of YouTube afterwards, as a reward. That seems to work quite well for them.
Thank you. And the next question is, how can we, working with children who have autism during school playtimes and supporting their interaction with other pupils in the school environment, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I think like having a structure and scaffold goes a long way. Like there's something called Lego therapy, which is really, really nice, which is for small groups of young people, and you can work as a team basically to build something. And it's really, really good, because each child has a role, and they need to use and help each other to build the thing that they need to build. Maybe we'll put a link in the email that goes out, Liv, but having something that's structured like that might be a really, really good because I think a lot of young people with autism have problems with unstructured time, or like freestyle games where like they don't know the rules. You know, having a board game club, or like something where there's real defined rules and structure can really help them. And you know, like everyone likes stuff like that anyway, so it's I think that's a really good start.
I think in certainly in like mainstream schools, it's very easy for children with autism to be left out of activities, and you know, sometimes TAs, if you're on playground duty or you're supporting a child one-to-one, you know, find other children, find small groups of children that they could play with, if they've got similar interests, or if they're playing football, or if they're playing a game where that child could quite easily access, if they had a bit of support, help them make those introductions and make those friendships, because some children with autism will be looking at something that they really want to engage in, but not quite know how to make that initiation of, you know, can I play with you? And so it's important that we help them facilitate those relationships and friendships as well.
Thank you. And one of the questions that we had come through was, how can we stay in tune with the parents and caregivers to so the best support can be given, and positive relationships can be gained as well as developed?
I think it's really, really important to have a good relationship with parents and caregivers, because consistency in every environment is key for a child with autism. You know, if they've got the same strategies and techniques used at home as they do in school, that child will thrive and really develop. I've found Homeschool Diaries to be the best. You know, just having a diary where I can write, you know, what somebody did throughout the day, what they did well on their own, what they've struggled with today, did they have any behaviours that were challenging, and then send that home in their backpack. And then parents will write, how was their evening? And sometimes it's just little things like, you know, so and so didn't sleep very well last night, so he'll come into school quite tired. I can already sort of anticipate, okay, it's going to be quite a challenging morning if I'm putting a lot of demand on him. So I might give him a little bit more of a chilled morning before he can like then fully engage with activities. So Homeschool Diaries, absolutely top. I know there's also some technology out there as well that you can do about sending pictures home and via apps and stuff. I can't remember what one of them's called, but yeah, it's really good to keep parents engaged and up to date with what their child's up to every day.
Yeah, Yeah, definitely that. And I think if you know, your schools might do this, but that one of the schools I worked at, like, yeah, those diaries are amazing because a lot of the kids came on transport, so we wouldn't necessarily have those like incidental chats with parents and carers. But if you can, encourage your school to do like community events and activities, whether it's like, I know it's difficult at the moment, but like summer fairs, that sort of thing, like a family disco we used to do at our school, which was amazing. Like everybody had so much fun. Like really encourage those sort of events, and you know, that can also help build amazing relationships as well.
Very interesting, thank you. And how can we support an ASD child who has a very low level attention span?
Lots and lots and lots of very short activities, and then you build and build and build very, very incrementally and slowly, for sure. Again, have these on a schedule. Like, yeah, lots and lots and lots of small, really interesting, really engaging activities. Tailor it to what they like, you know, just all the sort of stuff we've been saying. But yeah, even if it's a minute at a time or even less.
Yeah, and I think making, certainly for young boys, I found making the lessons as physical as possible. Like I had a child who would just not sit down at a desk and write. There was no way he would sit down and write on a piece of paper. So we went out to the playground and he wrote chalk on the walls instead, like, because it was outside. He was, you know, he got to run around the playground as soon as he'd written a sentence, and it was doing something that was just a little bit different for him, and he didn't have that connotation of like, oh, it's just, you know, boring school, sitting writing on paper. Yeah, making it as physical and as interesting as possible.
Great, thank you. And are there any strategies that we can use to help ASD students learn correct English spellings in the classroom?
It's a good question. I'm sure there are. I'm sure that there's some resources out there on. I use Twinkle quite a lot for SEN resources. They're fantastic, and a lot of their stuff is free. Some of it you do have to pay for, but it is all out there. In terms of spelling, I think one thing that we did for phonics in my year 1s and 2s was we had, instead of whiteboards where you were writing it, we had like the little magnet boards, and we had magnetic letters. And so they get used to actually putting those letters in the right place rather than writing them. And then as we sort of progress into actually then learning handwriting, they put the letters in the order on the magnetic board themselves, and then they copy it from that board. That seemed to work quite well for very basic words, you know, at Key Stage 1 level. But I think a lot of it will be practice and sort of mirroring example work and stuff.
Yeah, and the more that you have all these symbols that we sort of keep talking about, the more that you have those around, and you just use them like with labeling classrooms, or you know, just incidentally like having them as part of your lesson and stuff. Just that's a lot of exposure, and that's a lot of practice. So yeah, that should help as well, I think.
That makes sense, thanks. And are there any strategies to help pupils with pathological demand avoidance?
So PDA is a very interesting condition, and it is hard to get recognised. I know that there are some boroughs in London that won't recognise it as an official diagnosis, but as the name suggests, it is where children really, really do not respond to authority, and not just necessarily authority in terms of like, you know, the teacher. It's just anybody who will tell them what to do. I think we will do a separate webinar on pathological demand avoidance because there is so much to delve into. And I can't possibly answer it in one quick question, but I have written a blog about it, which we can link in the email that goes out, which sort of goes through what it is, why children find it really difficult to cope with demands, and then some things that you can do. But I'll look at doing a webinar on it as well.
Thank you. And I think the final question, this is something that came through in the Q&A box, is well, what are the best methods to utilise to encourage children with autism to share adult time and toys with other children that are present on the scene?
In terms of sharing, it's quite similar to like maybe how I would have it with a neurotypical child, like just explaining sharing is a social concept, and you know we share with friends because it's nice to do that, but also I would set time limits. So if a child has got a sensory toy, a child with autism has got a sensory toy that another child wants to use, I would say, okay, Adam can have the sensory toy for 5 minutes, and then it will be Sam's turn, and then I would use the timer just to count down, because I've explained it's just like any transition of giving up a toy. So I would explain, yeah, the change is going to happen, this is why, and it's going to happen then, and then closer to that time limit I would go in and you know, give a minute's countdown, and then the 5-second, 10-second countdown as well, and then gently, like, either, well, hopefully the child would offer the toy to the other child themselves, but also gently encourage them to do that by like sort of like physical guidance as well.
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. Timers are an amazing tool for this, and just I've had kids where 10 seconds is too long. So again, just don't be afraid to keep it really, really short, swapping, and build on it.
Fantastic, thank you. I think that almost covers all the bases. We may have had 1-2 extra questions come through actually. So, okay, so this is an interesting one. How do we decide in a mainstream school whether a child has just has behaviour or challenging behaviour, or whether they're actually autistic when they're being disruptive in class?
I think so. Challenging behaviour is just one facet of it. Typically, if you were suspecting that a child had autism, there would be other indicators around, mostly the things like that we said in the Triad of Impairments, around like they struggle with unstructured time, they struggle with social communication, they struggle with social imagination and things like that. So there would be other things as well. But if you do, I think if you've got any concerns that actually, you know, a child is displaying behavior for a reason other than, you know, they just want to be disruptive, then it's a great opportunity to talk to your Senko, and to talk to, or to raise it with a member of SLT and just say, hey, look, you know, because they might know that actually that child is being investigated, or in the process of having a diagnosis of a condition. And so you might just, you know, keep a log of the behaviours, so that you can see if there are any potential triggers or any situations that make the behaviours more challenging. And then if you've still got concerns, go to your Senko or a member of SLT, and just sort of discuss that privately.
That makes sense, thank you. And someone else asked, how can we plan our lessons with a TE who's looking after a student with autism in a mainstream school?
Is that TA?
I think it might, yeah, I think it might be the TA instead of T.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of these strategies that we talked about today can really, really help. You know, if you're a teacher and you've got a TA that's going to work with a student who's got additional needs, it's up to you to differentiate, just like you would with any other kids. You just have to make sure that the kid's going to hit their targets, or, you know, whatever you want them to get out of the lesson, but you might need to just deliver it in a slightly different way. It might need a bit more structure, it might need a bit more, make a few resources to be made, but essentially it's just like any other differentiation. And hopefully some of the things that we talked about can give you some ideas on that. And like Liv said, like if you are struggling for resources and things, Twinkle's really, really good for that. But yeah, if you just sort of see it as an extra level of differentiation.
Yeah, and I think work with your TA on how they want to deliver that. So you might want to be delivering more whole class activities, which are slightly differentiated for the child as well. But then if you've got the TA who is actually going to be delivering more one-to-one work and is going to be doing different things compared to the rest of the class at their particular workstation, just have a chat with them maybe every morning to say like, hey, this is the timetable for today. This is where I really want you to focus with this particular child. Here are the resources. And, you know, if have a plan, always have a plan in terms of like, okay, if you have a child who is prone to challenging behavior, that TA can own that situation. You've got 29 other kids to potentially focus on in mainstream schools. So, you know, give the TA that autonomy to own, okay, I'm going to do this if you know, things melt down, or if things get challenging.
Yeah, and but also like, do plan time to deliver the teaching to that child yourself as well, like if you're the teacher, because it's great that you've got a TA who's going to work with that student. That's a really, really amazing resource, but you're the qualified teacher. If this student needs extra support, they need the highest level of support. So, you know, use that person as a resource, but you're the teacher. You need to make sure that you have as much input on that child's learning as possible.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. And I think we can take this as the last question. Can't see any others, but if a child comes from another country and say if English isn't their first language, how much time do we need to give them to decide whether or not they are on the autism spectrum?
So I think if I'm sort of reading between the lines of that question, I think they're trying to ask, you know, obviously if English is your additional language, then they will naturally have communication difficulties because they can't communicate in English with us. It is a lot harder, but I think, again, sort of going back to a similar question we had earlier, you would see more like typical autistic behaviours apart from just communication. So when I'm teaching a child with English as an additional language and I don't speak their language, I use PECs a lot. I use a lot of visual aids. I use a lot of like, we do a lot of work with dictionaries, and I also do try to learn some of their language to help them feel more settled. But sort of you would see a delay in how that is picked up if they had also an underlying condition of autism. Typically, like children who are neurotypical but just simply don't speak English would pick that up quite quickly, and would be able to function at their normal sort of what's it called, chronological age. There would be other indicators that they potentially would have autism, but it would take a little bit longer to assess. I agree.
That makes sense. Thank you. So that's all the questions that we've had come through. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Ross. Well, thanks everyone for staying on. I know it's like we have run over a lot, but hopefully you have taken away some really helpful strategies, techniques, resources to help children with autism, and we will be sending some out in the follow-up email after this. If you want to get in touch with us, we're on all the socials. I haven't got our Instagram on here, but we have got Instagram. And also, if you want to chat to me about anything more special needs related, my email address is at the bottom here. As I said, I work with our special schools, so please, if you're interested in special schools, let me know. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you all on the next webinar whenever that's coming up. I think in May. Have we got one, Ross? We've got one on behaviour management.
We do, yeah, on the 6th of May. So
yes.
communications will be coming through shortly about that.
Great. So 6th of May, pencil it in, behaviour management, and we will see you there.
Oh, see ya.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.